All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Westwind Report. Today is April 2nd, 2025. And today we've got a couple things we're going to cover in regards to Canadian politics. We've got biological clocks. We've got Mark Carney introducing government-funded homes. We've got MP Paul Chang resigning. We're going to talk about who has momentum going in as this campaign selection cycle continues. Yeah, without further ado, let's hop right into it. First things first, let's take a look at what Pierre Poilievre had to say, and it seems to have the internet ablaze.
We will not forget that young 36-year-old couple whose biological clock is running out faster than they can afford to buy and have kids. We will not forget.
So that's it. That is it. I'm not sure if this outrage culture really works anymore. Like, maybe this did in 2020, but I don't think that people are getting offended by this anymore. Like, I've heard the term biological clock used by like multiple women, right? And we have these liberal MPs, Ryan Turnbull, saying Pierre Poilievre weighing in on women's biological clock is like a sundial trying to teach a smartwatch how to tell time. A liberal government will always stand up for a woman's rights. What did he say there that is anti-women's rights? I'm sorry, I'm not following along with this liberal messaging. Like, he wasn't really addressing women's ovaries and saying, hey, they're going to dry up, so you guys have to go have kids. Like, he was illustrating a point that probably he's heard stories from hopeful couples that want to start a life, and due to financial burdens, they're having to put that off. And then, hey, like science, as ladies get older, the more difficult it is to become pregnant and the more complications can happen while pregnant. And like, that's who he's talking to, right? And people are unable to do that because since Trudeau and the Liberal government took over in 2015, housing costs have doubled, if not tripled in some places. So people are having to put that part of their life off. And with this too, I'll also note that conservatives are focused on those family hopefuls, right? Those young adults that want to start a family and own a home. And they're not even necessarily just talking about people who are wanting to have kids. Like, even young couples who maybe necessarily don't want to have kids, they want to own land. They want to own a home. They don't want to live in a condo their entire life. They don't want to live in apartments. They don't want to rent. Doesn't matter if you're having a kid or not. That's who the conservatives are talking to. They're not really talking to the left-leaning individuals who are going to find offense to something like this and are never going to vote for conservatives in the first place anyways. I guess it's fine for the conservatives' messaging and this, and I think a lot of common sense people are just being like, yeah, like, this is something that I've talked about with my doctor. But I don't know. I guess we'll see who shows up on April 28th to vote. And with Pierre Poilievre addressing the housing topic in a specific way, I guess, let's see what Mark has to say about his proposal for addressing the housing crisis that his Liberal government created.
We used to build things in this country. After the Second World War, Canada faced a housing crisis. The government built prefabricated homes that were easy to assemble and inexpensive. And those homes are still here 80 years later. Now we're in another housing crisis. And it's time your government got back into the business of building affordable homes. We will build new homes for Canadians at a pace not seen since the Second World War. We'll build a Canada you can afford.
Yeah, no thanks. I ain't buying it. No, not me. Not me, Mark. I don't know about my fellow Canadians, but I know exactly who put us here in this housing crisis to begin with. I know exactly who put us here. And also, Does anybody believe that the Liberal government is competent enough to tackle the housing crisis when they're the ones that made it in the first place? It's like an arson showing up to the fire with a water bucket. But also, if you listen to his words, what he's saying, and what he's proposing, and you look at the pictures of these supposed shacks that he is proposing that the government builds, sounds a lot like communism. It really does. It sounds like government owned and operated buildings and land and housing, and yeah, I don't know about this one, Mark. Like, he fails to mention a couple key details, right? So this is essentially government owned and operated housing, right? So what are these government housing units going to look like? How much will they cost? Who will they be available to? How much of our taxes are going to increase in order to fund something like this? Is that even possible? We're already taxed to oblivion. Can they even go much higher? I don't know, but Mark seems to want to find out. Who owns the land on which these houses are built? What companies get the contracts? Right? Like, the problem with housing in Canada is simple, right? The Liberal government, through an influx of immigration with no investment into the private sector, no investment into infrastructure, over regulatory demands for contractors who are trying to build homes, carbon tax, emission tax, the list goes on and on. That's why we have a housing crisis. Because our Liberal government, through policy and regulation, pushes investment out of Canada. Like, to be so cavalier about presenting a half-baked communist-light housing plan in order to fix a problem 10 years of a Liberal government got us into is truly commendable from Mark. I will give it to him. And I will note that from the sounds of this, it sounds Mark wants the government to be completely in control of your life, which is 10 times creepier than what Pierre Poilievre said about biological clocks. We need to wake up, Canada. So this proposed, I guess you can call it that, housing plan from Mark Carney is he is going to double the amount of homes the federal government promises to build in a year, so he's going to increase it to 500,000. How are we going to do that without burning some emissions, you might ask? So, in my opinion, it seems like Mark is failing in the housing, and he's also failing in the energy sector. Because he was asked today about Bill C-69, the pipeline killer bill, because he's promising to be Team Canada and invest in all of this energy, but we have this insane Liberal bill, Bill C-69, that makes it nearly, if not completely, impossible to build pipelines in Canada due to government regulations, red tape, masked in environmental concerns. So here, hey, if we have to build 500,000 homes in order to make Mark's vision of the future, the New World Order, come true, we're gonna need to repeal that bill, eh, Mark? Let's see what he has to say about that when asked about it.
How do you reconcile keeping Bill C-69 with your plans to build infrastructure in Canada? Do you plan to repeal Bill C-69?
We do not plan to repeal Bill C-69, to answer your question directly. What we have and made very clear 10 days ago, formally with the First Minister's meeting, is that we will move for projects of national interest to remove duplication in terms of environmental assessments and other approvals. And we will follow, as the federal government, the principle of one project, one approval to move forward from that.
What does this mean?
What's essential?
What are you talking about?
At this time of crisis,
make sense.
To come together as a nation, all levels of government, to focus on those projects that are going to make material differences to our country, to Canadian workers, and to our future, and work closely together. And the federal government is looking to lead with that by saying we will accept provincial environmental assessments to move forward with that for example, clean energy projects or conventional energy projects. There are many others that could be there. Last point, which in many respects is the first point. We will always
So then why
ensure
make the
that
point?
these projects move forward in partnership with first.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur
Wonderful.
Carney.
So that's Mark. And that's not me, and the audio quality is bad. That's the looks like CBC or something trying to cut that out. That was a little off script. He wasn't supposed to say that about Bill C-69. They were trying to cut the broadcast, but got him. And this is what's so funny about Mark. If he wants to tout around a Canada First campaign, it's exactly what the journalist asked. Then what about the energy sector, Mark? Wouldn't it make sense if you're really Team Canada to unleash Canadian energy and get some serious infrastructure built and some serious infrastructure promises made so that we can be energy independent? So then, hey, when a foreign nation comes at us with tariffs, instead of our PM resigning and plunging our government into complete chaos like Trudeau did, we would be able to tell them to stick to tariffs where the sun don't shine, because we're energy independent. And when we're energy independent, we can improve agriculture in Canada. We can improve just overall wealth in Canada. We can have less taxes on things. We can import less. We can make more at home. We can keep our economy and make it independent from all these foreign markets. Once we can get that established, then yeah, let's talk about shipping oil across over to international markets. But let's break ground first. And you can't do that, right? But that's not what Mark Carney's about. In Canada, we're top 3 in oil reserves in the world. We've got 30% of the world's forest here. We've got an abundance of fresh water, rare earth materials, but we're still broke and not taken seriously on the world stage. We're not going to be able to get there with things like Bill C-69. So he can say all this stuff, right? He can make all these promises say all these weird buzzwords about, okay, we're going to invest in this while not making duplicate projects. So we're going to do one project, one approval. Is that not what you were doing before? And so what about Alberta, Mark? What about your beloved Oilers? But I won't speak for Alberta. I'll let Premier Danielle Smith break down the current situation with Alberta in relation to essentially Mark Carney and the Liberal government.
Do have citizen-initiated referenda, and it will be up to Albertans to decide what kinds of questions that they want to put forward. I don't think we've seen any successful citizen-initiated referenda yet, but that's the mechanism for things like that. For my part, what I'm going to do is continue to advocate for whoever happens to be the Prime Minister to make good on the 9 things that we want changed. We want to see an end to emissions caps. We want to see an end to net zero power regs, net zero vehicles, net zero building codes. We want to make sure that we control our own environment for methane emissions. We want to make sure that we don't have a ban on tanker traffic off the West Coast, that we have control over our process to approve pipelines with an end to Bill C-69 and a couple of other things. Those are things I'm advocating for, and I will continue advocating for them after the election. I will give whoever happens to be in the chair 6 months to make good on trying to address some of those critical problems for Alberta. And then at the same time, I'll be going across Alberta on what I'm calling our What's Next panel to see what kind of feedback we get. But we can't stop trying to get the right policies in place. As I mentioned, we have a prime minister right now who says one thing in English, one thing in French, one thing in Eastern Canada, one thing in Western Canada, one thing to me, and then one thing to when he's asked by the media. So I don't actually know what this prime minister is going to do. I'm not encouraged by that flip-flopping so far. But we'll see what happens after this next election. But those are bottom line things. If you want to get pipelines built, if you want to get corridors established, if you want to open up markets, you have to get rid of all of the policies that are dampening investment in our country. And you can't have it both ways. I'll continue pressing for it, and I hope there's a change of heart after the election.
So that is Premier Danielle Smith. And she lays it out pretty simple, right? These are the demands. This is what needs to get done. And if you are a smart prime minister, you're going to, or running to be prime minister, you're going to listen to what the premier of Alberta has to say about the oil and the oil infrastructure, because that has been a sector that has been severely lacking for Canada for the past 10 years when it shouldn't have been. And you can just look at the difference between the communication styles with Danielle Smith and Mark Carney. Like, Danielle Smith is direct. Here's my point. Boom, boom. Bill C-69, gotta go. We gotta get tankers off the northern coast of BC, which I am going to say, no, we don't need that. I'm going to stick up for beautiful British Columbia and our gorgeous coastlines. We don't need that right now. What we need is the Energy East pipeline to go through so we can export our oil from Alberta to Eastern Canada so they can stop buying oil from the States and conflict oil from foreign markets. But I digress. It is that simple. Listen to the premier. Right? But Mark doesn't get this. He doesn't get this. Mark is a international investment banker. He's not a man of the people. He's not a leader of a nation. He has no compassion or empathy for average Canadians. Look at the shit that the Liberals did to us for the past 10 years. We are just numbers on a spreadsheet to this guy. Anyone ever go to a bank and say they had a good experience, that they had an illuminating conversation with their banker? It's also worth noting, while touting these net zero climate change policies that Mark Carney loves so much and that Justin Trudeau loves so much, that killed our energy sector, Mark and Brookfield Asset Management was investing billions of dollars into pipelines all over the world, including Brazil, the UAE, and even America. There's actually a cool couple billion on that one. Let's take a look at this. Here we go. Breaking news. Pipeline paradox. Brookfield to buy U.S. pipeline giant as Carney refuses to repeal Bill C-69 pipeline ban. What's good for the Canadian goose doesn't hold for the American eagle, at least not for former Brookfield chairman Mark Carney. That's because the Liberal candidate for Prime Minister, a vocal opponent of major new pipelines in Canada, is now facing scrutiny as Brookfield Asset Management, the investment giants he once chaired, closes in on a USD $9 billion deal to acquire Colonial Pipeline, the largest fuel transport system in the United States. How is that not a conflict of interest? This guy is investing in overseas pipelines while killing and refusing to revive Canadian pipelines. And he is currently the elected Prime Minister of Canada. I don't know. I didn't vote for him. I don't know who did. Like, you can't make this up, how this is just so muddy and dirty. And I'm not trying to convince anyone or be biased. I'm just looking into this stuff and reading about it. And also, it's worth pointing out, the irony is just completely lost on me with this one. The Colonial Pipeline. That's right. The man, Mark Carney, who is leading the Liberal Party, is part of a hedge fund that bought a pipeline called the Colonial Pipeline after the Liberal government spent, the last 10 years telling Canadians whose only crime was simply being born in Canada that we are all colonizers and we all must repent for our past sins. It is gobsmacking, the irony of that. The old Colonial Pipeline, the biggest one, the largest fuel transport system in the United States. Carney's got a couple bucks invested in that. It's just incredible in the worst way possible. And like I said before, all while investing in foreign, He was Trudeau's special advisor and economic advisor for the Trudeau Liberal government for the past 5 years, as the Liberals pushed through these like radical climate policies that just halted and killed infrastructure to be built in Canada. Actually, I wonder why Mark did that. Why do you think he did that? Why do you think he was whispering in Trudeau's ear to kill all of the pipelines? Why do you think he was doing that? Perhaps it was to make his company's investments more profitable? Because he was on the chair. He was the vice chair of Brookfield all up until January of this year when he threw his hat in the ring. So perhaps by halting Canadian infrastructure in oil, that brings up the value of the international pipelines that are actually being built. Because if Canada built our own pipeline infrastructure, we would own the global market. Because everybody would want to buy Canadian oil because it would be ethically harvested. We have an abundance of it. And America would just buy it all from us. We could fund our entire country off a month's worth of oil shipped to the US that way. But that wouldn't bode well for those foreign investments for Mark, would they? And you're going to try to tell me this guy's not compromised? You're going to try to tell me this guy's not dirty? You're going to try to tell me that this guy doesn't have any conflicts of interest as being our prime minister? He has no interest on foreign assets, investments, and interests? And everyone says, oh, his money is now in a blind fund. You're also going to try to tell me that this guy who spent his entire life growing his wealth, and money is his entire persona and his entire personality and his entire means to show that he's successful, you're going to try to tell me that this guy doesn't know exactly where all of his money is still invested? That he just, he blind trust. I don't know where it's invested. Someone moved it. You're going to try to tell me that he gave it to someone to move? Really? You can call it speculation, but look at the evidence. And we'll get into it a little bit later with this next story about, I guess, former MP Paul Chang resigns, not after being fired from Carney for essentially calling for the political capture of his political opponent and deportation back to China. But Carney didn't fire him for that. He dropped out and apologized after the RCMP officially announced they were launching an investigation. Fancy that. But let's have Pierre Poilievre break it down for everyone.
While opposing pipelines here, he profited off of foreign pipelines. He continues to have those foreign conflicts, which will prevent him from doing what's right for Canada. Just yesterday, we saw those conflicts play out when he refused to remove Paul Chang, a Liberal candidate who had said that a Canadian Conservative candidate should be turned over on a bounty to the Chinese government that wants to imprison or possibly even kill him because he is a political dissident. Mr. Carney said that Mr. Chang could stay on as a candidate. It wasn't until midnight when we found out the police were involved, because it is a potential criminal offense, that the candidate stepped aside himself, not being pushed out by Carney, but because he decided on his own. Mr. Carney will never put our country first. He will always put himself first. And that is the choice in this election.
So yeah, that's pretty much what happened. And we have the apology from former MP Paul Chang. And let's just read it out and let's see how good this apology is. So he says, and I quote, "For the past 3.5 years, it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve the people of Markham, Unionville, as their Member of Parliament. Every single day, I served with integrity and worked to deliver results for the people of my community." Yeah, sure you did. "I'm proud of what we have achieved together, and I remain deeply grateful for the trust placed in me." Yeah, buddy, I don't think you got a lot of trust placed in you anymore there, pal. This is a uniquely important election with so much at stake for Canadians. As the Prime Minister and Team Canada work to stand up to President Trump and protect our economy, I do not want there to be distractions in this critical moment. Wow, how thoughtful. That's why I'm stepping aside as our 2025 candidate in our community of Markham, Unionville. I want to thank my family for their support and our community for standing with me as we have worked to build a better future. For over 3 decades, I have served my community with my fullest commitment to keeping people safe and protecting our country's values. And I always will. I don't know if I believe that. Our country's values? Is that what we're going to go with? Former MP? Really? That's a tough sell. That is a tough sell, my friend. And you can also notice that there's no apology to Joe Tay, who was the conservative who Mr. Chang told for people to kidnap and collect a bounty on. No mention of that. No sorry. There's no sorry in this apology. Just please see my statement below. I don't know. It doesn't really bode well for Carney in this situation. Right? Like, why didn't he fire him after this? This was like a pretty outrageous threat for him to make against a political opponent. And so, why didn't he fire him? That's might be a little sinister, but perhaps there's some foreign interference happening or foreign interests at foot here. And I'm not the only one raising these questions, right? He's even being asked about it in his pressers today. So let's take a look and see how he's addressing this.
Morning. Next question. Good morning, Olivia Stepanovich, CBC News. It appears the involvement of the RCMP forced candidate Paul Chang to bow out of the race. Meanwhile, the Conservatives just removed their problematic candidate in Windsor within an hour of learning of issues of this individual. Why didn't you do the same with Chang? And was this a teachable moment for you?
Mr. Chang,
Great question.
Resignation, offered his resignation last night. I accepted it. As I said yesterday, his comments were deeply troubling and regrettable. We will move on with looking for a new candidate for Mark. And I'll leave it at that.
And I'll leave it at that. We're going to stop talking about it. I don't think so. I don't think people are done talking about this. And it's just, oh yeah, you apologize. That's good enough for us. It's, nah, I don't think so, man. Like, it's just a little shady, right? Because I will add, and I will point out, that it's very interesting that whenever some sort of foreign interference happens between the Liberal Party and China, nothing ever seems to come of it. Everything gets swept under the rug. Why did Mark Carney not just fire this guy? Would it surprise you to know that Brookfield Asset Management, who former chair Mark Carney, as of January 2025, operates offices, in energy infrastructure, and other real estate operations in China to the tune of well over, I think it was $5 billion they have invested in China infrastructure? Carney himself, he also waltzed into a China State Bank at the end of 2024 where he secured a $250 million loan from that Chinese-owned bank. Because any prime minister, any leadership candidate who was not beholden to a foreign country or due to foreign investments and conflicts of interest, a sane leader of any political party, that they would fire him. They would fire Paul Chang. They would. However, the man at the helm and the man in charge is Mark Carney, who we already know owes China at least $250 million. So yeah, maybe this is a teachable moment for us Canadians, actually, to realize how corrupt the Liberal government is and how many pies Mark Carney has his hands in. He's a walking conflict of interest, and we need to wake up to this. And he also possesses no charisma or unique ideas when it comes to building a better future for Canada either, right? So if you're going to be a villain and you're going to be this sleazy guy and this bad guy, right, you might as well be cool about it. But he's like a charisma black hole. Like, even when he gets caught up in scandals and the way he addresses it, it just puts people to sleep. And I'm only joking because this guy is really dangerous, but still. And what I mean, too, is how he has no unique ideas. He's getting caught up in a plagiarism scandal. Right? So let's listen into this and see how he's reacting to that.
On Friday, the Post published a piece revealing 10 instances of plagiarism in your doctoral thesis. Your party responded by attacking the academic who was quoted in the piece. Some of your surrogates mentioned pulling media subsidies because they didn't like the piece. First of all, did you plagiarize? And is this a demeanor we can expect from a Carney government? Will you attack the media when you don't like the work we do?
Thank you for your question. I'm pleased that there's such interest in my doctoral thesis. It's languished on the shelf for over 3 decades. I think what you'll find in the middle of that piece is a very clear refutation of these, quote, allegations by the senior-most academic at Oxford, Dr. Meyer, who was categorical in her rejection of many of the conclusions that you just made. If your question is, does a professor at Oxford, I think the statement of Dr. Meyer stands is pretty obvious where it is. And as I say, I'm pleased that there is intense interest in a game theory thesis of 30-something years ago.
Yeah, blah, 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 blah. Okay, buddy. So he doesn't answer the question as per usual. It raises the idea like, yeah, hey, you're being accused of plagiarizing, and you've also just plagiarized the conservative policies and campaigns and campaign promises, right? Like the no GST on first-time homebuyers, that was a Pierre Poilievre one. He didn't axe the carbon tax, but he put the carbon tax down to 0. The consumer carbon tax down to 0. He just put the value at 0. The corporate one is still in play, and all the emission caps are still in place. So these big corporations are just going to trickle down the cost to the consumer, so we're going to taste it anyways. But hey, man, at least it's a little cheaper at the pump. After we put in the carbon tax, we took it away. Aren't you idiots happy? So I don't know if he's a very smart guy, but a lot of quote unquote brilliant people get caught for plagiarizing, and when you hear Mark Carney public speak, you're just, I don't know, I guess he's just good with numbers. He's just not a people person. And honestly, I don't care about plagiarism over 2 decades ago or whatever. But it does raise the eyebrow. Yeah, it's a weird thing to be alleging. And then you hear his speech today, and it sounds eerily familiar to a certain political opponent of his. So he may have not plagiarized back then, but he's plagiarizing right now.
4 generations. Canadians have built this great country on the idea that if you work hard, like the people here at New Flyer, if you work hard, you should be able to afford a good life.
What binds us together is the Canadian promise that anyone from anywhere can achieve anything, that hard work gets you a great life.
Have a good home in a welcoming and safe community.
In a beautiful, affordable home, on a safe street, protected by brave soldiers.
And it's the duty of my government and governments at all levels to make that promise a reality.
Canada first, let's bring it home.
4 generations.
So, yeah. You want to talk about plagiarism? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And for those not watching on YouTube, for those just listening on Spotify, Mark Carney talking, that was him talking today, giving his Canada Promise speech. And the clips from Pierre Poilievre, that was yesterday in a rally where Pierre Poilievre has always campaigned on bringing back this Canadian promise. And yeah, it looks like Mark Carney's fancying up to that message. It seems like he likes it. So this guy's not only is Mark Carney compromised, he's also very disingenuous, with all of his policies and messaging now being ripped from the Conservatives. And everybody wants to talk about how bad Pierre Poilievre's internal polling is, and that there's a coup going on within the Conservative government or the Conservative Party. People are calling for Pierre to step down. It's all just fake. It's all just bluff. It's all just narratives and things that are just pushed by legacy media. But I just wonder, what are Mark's internal pollsters saying about him if he's starting to blatantly rip off Pierre Poilievre's policies and messaging that were so disastrous in the first place? Makes you think, man. Makes you think. Really just makes you think. And then you also see all this public polling as well. And you're just like, why are the Liberals such heavy favorites when you see clips like this and you read the stories that we looked at, right? All of his conflicts of interest, how he's beholden to foreign regimes. I don't know, could it be because, do you want to get super tinfoil hat? Could it be that the mainstream polls are skewed towards Liberals to later reinforce an unfavorable outcome to Canadians? Wow, that's a theory. I think that the polls are just severely wrong. I think that they're oversampling from Liberal pools. And I think that these pollsters, they receive contracts from the federal government to provide their pollster services. Right? Hey, man, the Liberals slide over an extra $10 million to a pollster and say, hey, give us a couple points on the top here, off top here, so we can look like we're doing something and look like we're popular, so we can keep pulling the wool over the eyes of all these Canadians. And it's all so muddy and it's all so unclear because you have Pierre also like selling out airport hangars in PEI. Right? Look at this. It's just, there was like, I think there was well over 1,800 people there. And PEI, that's a Liberal stronghold. And look at all these people coming out and supporting the Conservative government, which they have never supported in years. The Conservatives wouldn't even try to get these seats in past elections. So I don't know. You can choose to believe the polls, you can choose to not, but at the end of the day, polls don't vote, right? It's that simple, right? And I'll say it now, and I've said it before, this is a change election. You don't see this support coming out from Liberal strongholds unless this is a change election. It's that simple. No matter the outrage of left-leaning individuals and legacy media and trying to make all of these big stories out of nothing, people, at the end of the day, Canadians can't afford homes. We can't afford food. We can't afford the luxuries that we once had. Crime is up. Inflation is on the rise. The government spending is out of control. Everything is in disarray. Our public institutions, our healthcare systems are overrun. And despite Trump's best efforts to unite Canada, pride is down. No one knows what it means to be Canadian anymore. And this is a change election, and you see it. You see it with NDP, and everybody always says, the NDP, they always break towards Liberal, but I don't think so, not in this election, because there are a bunch of unions that are coming out. NDP loyalists are coming out, and they're endorsing Pierre Poilievre. All the young people who want a future and want to stay in this country and see it be prosperous, they're all voting Conservative. Too many people have struggled for too long. I think the Liberal government just overestimated how much pain they could inflict on us as a population. And to waltz out Mark Carney and say this is the savior is just laughable. And you see it in these rallies. And I'll just end it by saying the most you can do is educate yourself and try to educate people that you know, talk to people, hear different viewpoints, and just read about this stuff and make a sensible decision. And honestly, just get out and vote. Like, while we have the power to vote, just get out and do it. But anyways, I'm going to wrap it up here. And I hope to talk to everyone again very soon.